In 1920, artists began to reject logic and reason and recreated the world in their studios and cafes. They had a passion for love, poetry, and liberty. The Surrealist revolution was underway. Photography was part of this revolution, breaking the mold, creating photomontages, and coming up with new processes. It was now, truly, a part of the art movement.
The war was on. We went to and fro from the front to the Coupole Café. Often I'd be sitting in the Coupole with my helmet on, and Apollinaire was there in uniform with his head wound.
Poor, gentle Guillaume Apollinaire, the precursor of Surrealism, never knew how important his work would become. He died in that war to end all wars.
Montparnasse was a village then, like a little provincial town. Grass grew through the cobblestones. There were two cafes, the Rotonde and the Dôme. Our group would just get together. We didn't know that there was an audience for what we were doing. Meanwhile, people were too busy with the war to pay much attention. Paris was a free town, a town for the taking, and we took her. The whole revolution in art happened at that time. When we talk about surrealism and photography, we need to clarify certain things. Obviously, surrealism is above all a literary movement. At the time, it was almost a sect, which can be unbearable for those who are not members.
In this Paris that was still reeling from all the suffering, the agitators met. There was René Crevel, André Breton, Philippe Soupeau, Paul Éluard, Louis Aragon, and Robert Desnos. They all wanted to break with the past, advocating the values of the absurd and of dreams. They rendered their fantasies in a creative disorder. Photography was part of this movement. Like Max Ernst, whose photomontages showed the possibilities of parody and the misappropriation of images, the Surrealists refused the representation of reality and transformed it as they saw fit. After 2 years of doubts about the nihilism and tyranny of its predecessor Dadaism, the Surrealist dissidents triumphed and published their Surrealist Manifesto in 1924.
André Breton, who was the dominant figure, with his extremely strong presence, was interested in photography right from the 1920s. It appealed to him because it was something that could be done in the street. And these pictures could be used as the basis for any form of literary creation or flight of fancy. That was the first way they envisaged photography. Then soon after, Breton became interested in the way photography could be used to illustrate magazines and even his books.
André Breton asked the extreme surrealist Jacques-André Boiffard, a collaborator of Man Ray's, to supply pictures for his book Nadja.
When you think of surrealist photography, you immediately think of Man Ray.
The American Man Ray married a French woman who translated for him Rimbaud, Lautréamont, and Mallarmé. He was fascinated by the mood of rebellion in Paris and came to France in 1921. His studio became the Surrealists' meeting place.
I came to France as an art student, intending to visit the museums and see the originals of all the paintings I had only been able to admire the reproductions of. I got a far better reception from the avant-garde literary and artistic movements here than I had in New York. So I decided to stay. But as I didn't sell anything with my first exhibition, I started doing photography to earn a living.
The pragmatic Man Ray made light of surrealist dogma and followed his own path. He discovered the photogram, which was renamed the rayograph after him. Although it was not exactly a new process, it enabled Man Ray to become the master of all things strange. For example, he used solarization, a method of re-exposing a print to light during the development stage, to produce unearthly pictures of people with mysterious halos.
Before, it was all a matter of luck. I took the process seriously and perfected it to obtain a quality beyond that of ordinary documentary photo stories. People thought I'd touched up my negatives by drawing black lines around the subjects. But it was a known process. You developed an overexposed negative. But the next day, when I looked at it, I saw a small neutral zone between the areas with the highest contrast. And I studied it and repeated the experiment. So when you repeat something, it's no longer a matter of luck.
Man Ray combined experimental flights of fantasy and classical influences. If you blink in the shadow between the two faces, you'll see the outline of a gypsy girl.
Since I have two approaches available to me when I see a face that interests me and that I want to record, I use my camera because it's more direct, and there's no intervention by the painter or the artist. On the other hand, if I have a dream or something is conjured up by my imagination, I can't photograph it unless they manage to invent a camera that can photograph our dreams.
The body's subjected to all kinds of metamorphosis, and the portrait is treated humorously or given a fresh interpretation.
It's true, I look at things with a painter's eye. Someone once said to me, "Your photos look just like paintings, don't they?" And a friend said to me one day, "I don't like the portrait you did of me, it's too artistic." No, I said, it's not too artistic, you're the one who's artistic.
Maurice Tabar frenetically experimented with photography, making collages, superimposed pictures, photograms, and solarizations. He fell out with Man Ray, who had published instructions on solarization in various magazines. We can see examples of this process in Raoul Ubach's work.
Ubach belonged to the third generation of Surrealists. This Belgian artist arrived in Paris with an interest in photography and invented new processes such as burning, where you heat the film to obtain deformations which reveal latent images.
Ubach was greatly influenced by Heinrich Wilhelm von Kleist's play Penthesilea, about the Queen of the Amazons, which was a great success in Germany. He began to develop his assembly effects. He photographed his wife and his other model, then combined the photographs to make his Penthesilea series. He had brought back from Dalmatia photos of rocks. The Hungarian Brassai, whose real name was Gyula Halaz, frequented Berlin's avant-garde scene before joining the Surrealist movement. Nicknamed the Eye by Henry Miller, he became friends with the leading artists of the day.
I wanted to go to Paris because I wanted to become a painter. But I couldn't because I came back from an enemy country, Hungary. So I first went to Berlin. The Expressionist movement was in full swing at the time. After that, as soon as I could, I came to France. That was in 1924, and I landed right in the maelstrom of Montparnasse. In the cafes, it was like being at a fancy dress ball. There were all kinds of people there. Hindus, men, women. Life seemed so much fun and so weird that I completely forgot about shutting myself away in painting.
His transmutations are the product of his fascination for the primitive arts and an obsession to turn the female body into a musical instrument. The pictorial influence is omnipresent, and it was no coincidence that Dali used some of his photos in his collage, Phenomenon of Ecstasy. He adopted the professional name of Brassai in 1932, taken from the name Brasso, the village where he was born.
I changed my name because I had started taking photos, and I wasn't sure it would lead to anything, and I didn't want to put my name to something so uncertain. I wanted to keep my real name for better things. I've spent a great deal of time walking around Paris and looking at the walls, and I think that all the things on the walls are very interesting.
Brassai searched for all the fractures in the walls and brought out strange, disturbing pictures. Year after year, his insatiable curiosity guided him in search of major themes, such as love and death. Picasso was very keen on these street photographs.
Picasso has done a lot of graffiti too. He told me how one day he had been waiting in a bank and he'd done a graffiti on the wall. When the manager of the bank learned that it was a Picasso, he had the piece of wall cut out. And that piece of wall is in his apartment now.
After this first portrait of Picasso and 30 years of friendship, Brassai published Conversations with Picasso in 1965.
What has always surprised me about photography is that at first, I always wanted to do things which were as objective as possible. I liked Goethe, who, in the second half of his life, had gone from romanticism to classicism, in other words, objectivity. He found the world richer than himself, and he said, "Objects have gradually raised me to their stature." And this quotation greatly affected me.
The object requires no embellishment. It's enough in itself. Once it's been photographed, a simple rolled-up bust ticket becomes surrealist and involuntary sculpture, according to Dali.
Wolz, Wolfgang Schulze, is a German photographer who came to Paris very early on at the end of the 30s and who earned a living at the 1937 World's Fair taking photographs of models.
Wolz found his style by giving his strange fantasies a free rein and taking photographs of insignificant objects such as heads of garlic or dismembered rabbits.
Hans Bellmer was a young German graphic artist. After rather tense relations with Otto Dix and Berlin's creative scene, he found himself rather isolated for family reasons and created a strange kind of doll.
Bellmer was inspired by Hoffman's tales to make a piece called The Sandman. A man falls in love with a robot, thinking she was a woman made of flesh and bone. This fragmented, dismembered doll makes us feel uneasy and at the same time exerts a strange fascination. Bellmer used symmetry to make the usual identification with the body impossible. The fruit of his experimentation was published in Le Minotaure, a luxurious and eclectic magazine which featured the latest artistic creations. In 1939, it ceased a publication due to the war. The photos of Picasso's companion, Dora Maar, were equally disturbing. She'd met him at the Café de Flore, where she'd been playing a solitary game, sticking a knife between her fingers into the table. He'd been moved by the sight of her blood. This woman, who was no stranger to madness, exhibited her work alongside that of the Surrealists. Elie Lothar was only 24 when he did the Abattoir series for Georges Bataille's magazine Documents. It came as a huge shock. He also worked for the Prévert brothers and for Buñuel, but he died in obscurity.
Another extraordinary character in the Surrealist movement was Claude Cahun. This young woman joined the movement at an early age, but didn't stay long. She completely transformed her appearance and explored the possibilities of mirror effects, reflections, and disappearance.
Claude Cahun was also a poet, essayist, and actress. Her photographs blurred the lines between appearance and reality. She never stopped making variations on Baudelaire's theme of being, the victim and the executioner, according to which only metamorphosis is a viable solution.
Another character who came on the scene at the very end of the Surrealist movement in the 60s and who soon fell out with André Breton was Pierre Molinier. He was an extraordinary artist who was mainly a painter, but from the 60s through to his death by suicide, spent most of his time dressing up as a woman, touching up his photos, doing montage, all in a bid to create the ideal woman.
Having painted landscapes and portraits, Molinier fused his photographs and his fantasies. His bedroom became his studio. He said that he found in the Surrealists a complete understanding of what was inside him.
This group at once tried to find foreign correspondents, and it's true that Surrealism very soon became an international movement.
In England, Surrealist photography appeared after the war thanks to Lee Miller, Man Ray's muse, and her husband, Roland Penrose. In Germany, Max Ernst launched the movement with his photomontages. In Czechoslovakia, Surrealist photography influenced Jindřich Styrsky, co-founder of the Prague Group in 1933 and signatory of the Manifesto the following year. During the war, the American magazine View drew together the European influences, Man Ray, Breton, and Duchamp. But Surrealist photography was adopted by the likes of Paul Outerbridge and Horst.
Strictly speaking, there are no real heirs to Surrealism. Breton didn't leave an office which could rubber stamp the good Surrealists and exclude the bad ones, as there was when he was alive. If we describe Surrealism as the art of all things strange, it's clear that strange artists still exist today.
After Breton's death in 1966, the key question was, should we continue Surrealism? In 1969, the answer came by itself. It was not possible. Although the group was dissolved, the spirit still lives on. Young photographers continue to work with the same aim of showing the underside of things. By calling his dog Man Ray, William Wegman showed where his sympathies lay. It may not be the same dog, but it's the same poetry, the same tenderness, and the same way of remaining unusual.
Today, there is a new generation of photographers and artists which we may describe as post-surrealist. Boyd Webb in England, Wegman or Witkin in the United States, although they may not always be inspired by surrealism, produce work with a very surrealist approach.
When he was a child, Witken's father showed him photos in magazines of disasters and amazing events around the world. Witken was affected by these troubling images, and at 16, he began to express himself through photography.
This is Albuquerque, and you'll hear the barking of dogs, the sounds of chickens, because this is in a farm community. Yet we're very close to the center of town and the airport. So please join me in the studio. My reference from the beginning, especially with growing up with my brother as a painter now, was always been going to museums and looking at painting. It's only later on then did we look, then primarily myself, at photographs, because I thought for sure, very, very naturally, that photography supplanted every other medium. But that's true. I mean, a photographer should believe, or must believe, as a painter must believe, say, that the world, for the painter, the world is a painting. I believe that the world is a photograph, and I'm living in a photograph.
Witken brings to his studio deformed beings, cripples, and sideshow freaks. He has them pose in front of painted decors. These images, combining sexuality and death, rip apart taboos.
The degree of emotion, the degree of association that I choose to interpret through a photograph, all the photographs, finally, is about my own sense of questioning other reality. I don't photograph anything unless it's an important challenge to my own sense of being, my own sense of life and existence. I really want to know what it is to basically become, in a very real sense, through the use of photography and making photographs, making the print, that person or that object. And when I make the final print, I have at least a sense of what that is about. I don't become that person. It's not therapeutic. But it's a very, very direct, very, very intimate association with that person's life that I find, even though that window of time to do that is actually very short. But it's a given to me. I really feel that it's providential, that if I'm guided to an event or an association or a person, it's my job to take a photograph of that person.
Witken scratches and lacerates the negatives, then stains the photos and treats them with wax to obtain the desired effect.
The amazing and wonderful thing about being engaged in making art is the fact that all you can possibly do is be as unselfish and truthful as possible and hope that eventually you're going to make a personal and hopefully a historic contribution towards civilization and the history of humanity. And that is not such a bad thing to work and live for.
If Surrealism has not changed the world, it has at least changed art. Photography ceased being a mere recorder of the truth and opened up to the heady mystery of the human spirit.